I'd like to welcome everyone to this webinar and thank everyone for taking the time out of their day to join us. My name is Billy D. I'm the head of client services with Intrinsic Clinical Systems. And today I'm going to tell you about our site feasibility tool called Informer. Also with me, who you heard a moment ago, is Nick Lagrada, and he's going to walk us through a demo of the system after I give a little bit of background and information. So to talk about Informer, I have to talk about Pharmaca Consulting and Intrinsic Clinical Systems, which you see here on the screen. Now, Eric Lake and Matt Kiernan were consultants at the same company that had a great culture, and the company was acquired, and the culture they loved so much was phased out. So what Matt and Eric did was they decided to make a consulting company based on the culture that they loved so much. So they started Pharmaca Consulting, which is a consulting company with 35 employees that specializes in the life sciences industry. Now, as Matt and Eric had been in the life science industry before they started their company and after they started their company, they decided to leverage their experience with CTMS selection and system implementation, which had gone back to the 90s, and create their very own CTMS solution, which they called Intrinsic. And really how this came about was Matt and Eric saw outdated CTMS solutions, clients with the exact same frustrations with the existing CTMS, and they put a product on the market that was modern, solved issues that had been existing for years, and was not as expensive as the big machines that had been around forever. Now, after the release of the CTMS, Intrinsic began development on 3 additional tools for clinical trial management. And they are Insights, which is a resource management tool, an eTMF built in SharePoint, and Informer, which is a site feasibility tool. So really, this suite of products that are modern, easy to use, and integrate with one another make Intrinsic Clinical System the definitive resource, really, that companies need to manage their clinical trials from proposal to launch and everything in between. So now that we have an idea of ICS and what we do, I want to talk about Informer. So why did we create Informer? Well, we saw an issue with our clients where we said, do you guys have feasibility and site engagement capabilities? And when we looked at it, they said yes. And when we looked at it, it looked like this. Spreadsheets and emails, basically. And as most clinical trials are delayed due to enrollment struggles, we thought, there's really a need to centralize all this investigator information, feasibility information, site management, site engagement, and correspondences. And Informer allows you to do all that, and using the tool, you're going to go ahead and select the most qualified candidates from the start. To give you an idea of what it's like to work with Informer, here's the process. You would go ahead and supply ICS with an existing survey if you had one that we could recreate and make it as function as well, if not better than the previous. Or you could fill out the survey template, the feasibility template that we provide with you. You're going to provide feasibility recipient details, things like their contact information, anything else you want to give us, company name, title, any other contact information that you have. We're going to build the feasibility for you, and then you're going to approve it. You're going to go ahead and provide us with deployment details, things like date, time, any copy that goes in the email. And then after we do the steps 1 through 4 is really where you're able to step in and use Informer to monitor the responses and see what's going on and how it's doing. And that's what my associate Nick will get to later in the presentation. So now that we have gone through that slideshow, I want to just kind of show you the process of how one of your recipients will receive the site feasibility. So the tool uses email to deploy, and this is an example of body copy and subject line, things that we've been approved before. And the link is contained right here in the survey, and if we click it, we're going to go ahead and go right to the survey. And what you're going to see here are some pre-populated fields, some of which are locked for editing here in gray. That contains our information that we want unchanged in our database. These fields right here are unlocked in case the investigator wishes to update any outdated information. If I scroll down to the bottom here, I can click through the survey, and you're going to go ahead and see that this particular feasibility was not fully completed. It was submitted with some questions not answered. And recipients really like this because you're able to begin the feasibility, submit it, and come back and finish it or update answers. And as you saw when I clicked and the survey loaded, there is no user ID or password required. There's no login barrier here. And as that exists like that, if you don't have any of this information and you want to go ahead and forward the survey onto somebody else, if somebody else has information they can populate, It's as easy as forwarding the email, asking them to complete it, because like I said, it's not just, there's no login or ID, there's no password. Anyone can complete this, and people really like that. One, they could submit it without having everything readily available at the time, and two, if they need information from someone else, they're able to go ahead and forward it on. On page 3, we have a demonstration of the branching logic, which is something usually requested by our clients. So let's say someone went ahead and forwarded the feasibility, asked them to complete question 8. They would be able to do that very easily. And if they went in here and selected yes to question 8A, you see that it's going to trigger more and more questions to go ahead and be filled out. So this is an example of one of the feasibilities. We can make it as short or as long as it needs to be. The real show isn't here where the information is collected. The real show is later in the database in the back end, where Nick is going to show you all that a little bit later. I'm going to go into a few more details, like I said, about the creation of the survey process. So to develop a feasibility, we need the details. We can get this information in 2 ways. The first is if you have an existing feasibility, you send it to us to work from. We go ahead and recreate it. The second is if you don't have anything currently in place, we can go ahead and send you this feasibility template document for you to fill out. So the document walks the user through the creation of the feasibility, and it explains all the sections right here, which we will absolutely go through in detail with you to help you complete it. I'm just going to go ahead and skip right to question 4 and 5 to show you an example of how it works. So here we see a template example. So this is some information that would be populated by any of our clients. You see there's some pre-populated fields here. Some are unlocked for editing. Some are locked. Here's some free text instructions and notable information. And if I scroll down here, you get an idea of what something like that would look like. So it's delivered to us in Word like this using our template, and we go ahead and build the survey to look like that. The next example I'm just going to show you is about the branching logic, which we touched on in the survey. Right here you see that this is a single response question with yes, no, or pending. And we see that down here we have some branching logic, and if the question is answered yes, then 1A is going to appear, and that's demonstrated right here in this screenshot that the answer was selected yes, and question 1A then presents itself for the user to upload the document. Down here, as we provided you an example right here, section 5 is where you fill out all the information yourselves, and that's really how it works. You answer a question in Word, send it to us, and we will get the survey done. It's that simple. So now that we have discussed the survey and how we're going to go ahead and create it, next up I want to talk about deployment. So ICS will send you a contact template file where you can enter in your feasibility recipient's information. We can import that information all into the system, which allows us to do 2 things, and it's going to allow us to pre-populate the fields in the survey, which I showed you before, which decreases the amount of work for the recipient and increases the likelihood that they will complete it. We like to make it as easy as possible for everybody. And it allows our clients to look at the database of responses in the back end along with all the contact information. And that's something that Nick's going to go through later, like I said, and really, to hit back on my original point, allows you to select the most qualified candidates right from the start. So once the feasibility is approved and we have a list of recipients, we can move on to deployment. We'll confirm a date and time, and the client provides us the copy in the email and the survey hyperlink, and that's where we deploy. So with that, we are going to go ahead and move on to the tool itself. I'm going to make Nick the presenter. Nick, let me know when you get the cue for that.
I received it. Thank you, Billy.
All right, and I am now seeing your screen, and I will turn it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you. Welcome, everyone. So the default entry point into the Informer system is the My Campaigns screen. And that's what you see here now on the screen. It's My Campaigns. I've created a default campaign. So the campaign sits at the top of the tool. And it's like any other traditional customer relationship management system. And the campaign contains a roll-up of all the elements that are related to this feasibility. So if I were to click into the campaign, you'll see this dashboard with panels, and it has various bits of information related to this particular campaign. And I'm going to go over each of the panels. Starting on the left, we have the campaign summary, and it's just basic campaign information. The schedules that the campaign its proposed start and end, and the actual start and end. Below that is the actual surveys area, and these are the surveys that are associated to this particular campaign. So if we're to send out surveys to a list of investigators, the survey that we're sending out will be associated here in this panel, and there can be more than one. Below that are any associated studies, and typically it's just one associated study. I'm going to skip over to the right. On the right side are the sent surveys, and the sent surveys are what we like to refer to as the email sends. So each time a survey is sent to a batch of investigators, that email send shows up here. And we can send it 100 times. It could be sent over and over again. In this case, it was sent 68 times. And you can click into each of these, and it gives you various metrics on that particular survey. I'll click into this. Gives you information about this particular survey that was sent to this particular list of recipients. In this case, it was just a marketing list called Just John. It just has one person in it. I'm going to go back to the campaign screen. And getting back to the campaign screen, you can either click the back button or you can navigate to it from the top navigation, where it gives you the carrots where you can click on the feasibility campaigns and click on the carrot to see any recently viewed. So it's a very handy, quick mechanism for getting back to where we just were. So I'm going to click back into that. So below the sent surveys area are the site lists. These are like directory groups that contain a list of investigators. So in my example study investigator list, if I click into that, you'll see that there's a listing of all the investigators that are associated with this list. And these are the investigators that will get sent a particular feasibility when we do the email send. If you were to click any of these investigators or create a new one, you'll see a screen called the contact record. And the contact record has various bits of information related to this investigator. Just basic contact information, his site information, some studies that he's associated with. In the center, you see the surveys that he's been a part of. And below that is the communication and activities panel. This panel tracks any emails, phone calls, or tasks related to this investigator. And these can be initiated from within this system, so within the tool, by clicking the ... and clicking any of the options available here. And if you were to click, a new email, I'm going to send Billy a new email from the system, you click on the email option, type in your email or a question, whatever it is you wanted to ask Billy, and you can send it, and Billy will receive that, and it will be tracked within this Informer tool. So here's the one I just created. Going back to the campaigns, go back this way. Also in the center of the campaign screen is the activities panel, and this is very similar to what we just showed. It's a mechanism for tracking communications at the campaign level, and it's not just available within the tool. So we have direct integration with Outlook. And in Outlook, if you were to receive an email from an investigator that is in the system or not in the system, if you were to open up that email, I'll let this open up. At the top of the email, there's a track button. And this is part of the platform. This is a plugin for Outlook. It adds a track button. So this particular user, if they are in the system and we hit track, it automatically tracks this email under their record in the system. If they are not in the system, when you hit the track button, it will automatically create this investigator record in the system. This synchronization occurs every 15 minutes. So if you did want to have it immediately show up in the system, you'd have to do a manual sync. So let's go back to the campaign screen. Back on the campaign screen is on the bottom right is the posted fields. And this is, I like to think of this as the meat and potatoes of the system. This is where all of the answers to the questions can be accessed. By clicking this expand button, it gives you a much bigger view of all the elements and columns that are available within this particular investigator database. At the top, you see all the column headers, and these can be filtered by clicking the filter button. And it's very easy to manipulate this to narrow it down, similar to Excel, very familiar. By clicking the drop down, clicking that filter by a specific question. Perhaps you wanted to find all the investigators that answered this particular question yes. You would add that to the filter. It would filter it. You would then continue to further filter by adding another filter for this particular area, and you want to filter by where that question is yes. And now you have a list of investigators that have answered yes to this particular question. You also have the ability to export the entire data set. If you wanted to further analyze it, create charts, you can click the export to Excel at the top, which will produce an Excel file. And you can open that up in Excel, and it becomes a very familiar interface to then further manipulate, perhaps create some Excel charts, do what data analysis you need to do to further narrow down the list of investigators based off of the questions and answers that are in the database. Billy, was there anything you would like to add before I continue?
I think you touched on everything pretty great. I would just mention some real world examples that we've received. We've had clients go ahead, and I think that I'll just back to that survey that I showed you earlier. It contained a question about 483, and the only thing I would show Nick is if you could go back and search for if you put or let's use the example FDA, you can go ahead and put star FDA into the search field. And you're going to bring up every question from every feasibility that has ever included FDA. So just because it's not worded exactly the same in each feasibility, it's a great way to bring up, using that asterisk feature with the search terminology, you're going to go ahead and bring up every question that contains that term, regardless of where it appears in the question. So even though the questions are not identical, if you wanted to go ahead and search on FDA or 483 or anything like that, you can search through every feasibility question that's ever gone out, and clients really think that that is a very, very useful tool.
Well, thank you, Billy. Good addition. But moving on, all email communications, all the templates are tracked within the Informer tool. So within the campaign, there's a top navigation. And if you click that, the top navigation caret, you'll see some additional options related to the campaign, and one of them is email templates. So any email templates that we create or use for the campaign, they are stored here, and we store them here so we can see the past templates that were used and to give our clients access to all the communication templates that we use. And this is the general layout of how they work. It's typically text that's preceded with code, sort of like a mail merge, a merging. We don't send out 500 emails like individually. We send out the emails based off of a merge. So if we have a list of investigators that are in the site list, it automatically parses that and adds their name to the top here and sends out the email. So continuing, going back to the campaign. So each survey that's sent out has statistics. And if you were to click on the individual email send, it has information regarding this particular survey that was sent out related to the click rate, how many investigators interacted with it, how many bounced or didn't even reach the investigator, how many unsubscribed, the open rates. All this information is stored, and it can be analyzed in Power BI or any other tool, but it's here. It's also available on the top navigation. So on this top navigation menu is a high-level view of the system and all the options that are available. So we were recently just in the campaign, and the campaign does contain most of these elements. From a top of the level system, if you wanted to look above the campaign, you can click into the investigators list and see a list of all the investigators in the system. You can look at all the surveys that have been sent. You can look at all of the questions that have been created that exist in any survey. So if there were 100 questions spread out over 10 surveys, you would see all the questions in this view. Going back to the campaign, another useful feature is the drip campaign or the campaign automation. So the campaign automation schemes work like any other traditional drip campaign in a CRM system, where we can set up workflows that perform actions based on certain conditions that are met. So take an example, if we send out a feasibility to 100 investigators, after 3 days, if an investigator hasn't responded, to automatically resend the survey to them, asking them to fill it out. And after that, if they still don't have the time or haven't received the email or just haven't filled it out, we would then move them to a no response list. And these workflow jobs are created by us. We'll gather requirements in the beginning of how these workflows should work. And this is typically what they look like. This is the example I just described. So in the beginning, the initial email is sent. There's a wait timer of about 3 days. If after 3 days they have not responded, it resends the email. It'll wait a few more days. If they have not responded after that, then they'll be moved to this no response list. If at any time they have responded and submitted the feasibility, it'll send a thank you email and then notify someone on your team that they successfully completed it. So the tool has the ability to provide dashboards, executive dashboards. We typically do create these in Power BI. And Power BI is directly integrated with this tool, and we can pull any number and do metrics on anything within the Informer system. This is just an example of one demo chart. So this demo chart pulls its information from the Informer system. At first, it's just a typical flat, you cannot interact with this. But if you were to click it, it brings it to focus and it brings in the filters. So now we can manipulate this analytic, and perhaps we only want to see 1 question or 2 questions or 3 questions. We can create any dashboard. We generally like to gather the requirements up front for any metrics you may want to see. We have we do have some stock analytics that we do provide. Typically, we find clients like to create their own, so we'll hold a requirements gathering session regarding that and gather the metrics that you would like to see. Billy, was there anything you would like to add?
No, I think I've touched on everything. If you're wrapped up, I think we can turn it over to the question and answer session. Does that sound good, Nick?
Yeah, I think now's a good time. Yep.
Okay, great. So we got a couple questions that we'll go through. Please use the question and answer feature for the GoToWebinar to submit any questions. The first question we received it came in when you were talking about the drip campaigns, and they wanted to know if you're able to create any sort of list. Let me see if I can get this right here. Can you create marketing lists based on responses? For example, if somebody says yes to question 4, that person would go in a new group or something like that.
Yes. Yeah, that would be part of the workflow that we discussed within the campaign automation job. I can open that up just to show it real quick again. So in the campaign automation job, we would create conditions that would check whether or not a particular person answered a particular question in a certain way, and if they did, it would then add them to a particular list. Similar to this example that we have here, very similar. The conditions would be slightly different, and the list would be different, but the idea the same. It would just follow this pattern. It would do a check and move them into that list.
Okay, great. The next question we've received is, what is the difference between emailing from the system, like you showed us, and emailing from Outlook via the tracking feature?
So emailing from the system versus emailing from Outlook?
Yeah, using like when you use that track button.
Let me open this up. So under Outlook, you're logged in as yourself, the user. You may be, like I'm Nicola Garada, I would be logged in to Outlook as myself. And when I click the track button, it doesn't send it for me or know who I am. It just tracks this email up against this person. When I'm in the system and I send an email, it sends the email as the system, like the feasibility admin person. That's the big difference between the two ways of doing it.
Okay, but either way, but all the tracking shows up in the same area.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yes, that is correct.
Next question. If the survey link with the email is not unique to that user, would another user to whom the survey was forwarded see the responses from user 1? I think I can handle this one, Nick. Yes, they would, as long as they hit the submit button. So you could click through the survey, and once you hit submit, it is tracked to that particular link because there is no login. But if you did not hit submit, then anything that was selected by the user would not be saved. Did I say that right, Nick?
You did, yeah. You could look at it as like an on resume, take them back to the same place they were. So yeah, if they submit it and they submit half of the survey questions answered, the next person that opened it up would still see the first 50 questions answered. They would pick up from the 51st.
Okay, great. Next question is, how is the investigator contact list populated in Informer? The client has to provide you with the details in an Excel spreadsheet, or is there a business card reader capability? I'll defer that to you.
Business card reader? I'm not familiar with that term.
I believe that I think that's it's not something that's standard, but I believe it is a capability that we do have and could go ahead. And basically, it's just you put the business card in and it scans the information and takes everything out. Next up, we have and of course, yes, the client can provide us with the details in an Excel spreadsheet or some other way. We can get the information in the system however you want. Clearly, an Excel spreadsheet in our template is the easiest way. If you have the information in other areas, we'll absolutely work with you to get the information into the system. Next question is, can Intrinsic provide appropriate site list for feasibility study if sponsor is not familiar with the therapeutic area and does not know the key opinion leaders and sites well? Can Intrinsic provide, let me read that again because I'm just trying to understand it. Can Intrinsic provide appropriate site lists for a feasibility study if the sponsor is not familiar with therapeutic area? I think the question is, can we make recommendations for sites? We're using your information that you have for, to make these recommendations once the database is filled. I'd have to get back to you and see if we offer any recommendations for site lists based on therapeutic or disease area. Any other questions before we sign off for the day? All right, well, I think that's all the questions we've received. I want to thank everyone for taking time out of their day to join us. We'll, of course, post this webinar online, and be sure to check back with ICS for future webinars for this and all of our other suite of products. So with that, we'll give everyone back their day. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you. Yeah. Take care. Have a good day, everyone.